Good evening. I'd like to call the City of North Augusta study session for Monday, March the 25th, 2024 to order. Appreciate folks being here. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our City Administrator, Mr. Jim Clifford.
Mr. Mayor and Council, for the study session this evening, we're going to do it slightly differently. Normally, we do an agenda review, department details, and then go into a focus item. And obviously, because we're going to talk about Riverside Village tonight, that's going to eat up most of the discussion time. So we're going to front load the department details first. And then as we get into the agenda review, we're going to do all the non-Riverside Village items first. And then the final 3 items will be the Riverside Village items that Tommy Paradise, Joe Lucas, and myself will speak to in some detail. So with that, we're going to go into department details. And Jamie, if you want to go ahead and go through that in order.
First up will be Finance, Linda Williamson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. A few updates from Finance are our Cycle 1 due date will be April 4th, and our Cycle 2 disconnect dates will be April 3rd and 4th. Also, just FYI, our city property taxes are due May 1st without penalty, and also our business license renewal forms are due by April 30th without penalty. Thank you.
Lynn.
Next, Public Services, James Sutton.
Mayor, Council, got an update on the Clay Street Pump Station. It's going to be a replacement project that's funded by ARPA, RA, and the Utility Construction Fund. We had some activities. Republic Contracting started that project today, installing some stormwater barriers, some silt fence, and relocating some chain link fence. So that project's moving into the construction phase. Moving further, the solid waste transfer station that's funded by the Department of Energy. We're in the process of grading that site, preparing it for the building pad, and going out for bids to have a contractor come in and start putting things together for us.
That's great. Thank you, James.
Next up, Planning and Development, Tommy Paradise.
Mr. Mayor and Council, the Board of Zoning Appeals will have their regular monthly meeting next Tuesday.
Thank you. We know you've been busy. We know you're working.
Public Safety, Chief Johnson.
Good evening. One of the things that we're going to start tackling over at Public Safety, as you saw with our recent promotions, we've had 12 promotions in the last several months. And we've brought in at least 7 new officers since the first of the year. We want to make sure everybody's up to date on their cop cards so that we have up to date information when we pass them out. So what we've done traditionally is we've gone around to different businesses in town to get sponsorships. So we'll be doing the same thing and continuing to do that. So officers will not be paying for their own cards. It's a way to get out in the community and let the community support the project so that we can all work together. We'll make sure you get somebody. And anybody else that wants to sign on, we're more than welcome to take you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Next is Parks and Recreation, Rick Meyer.
Our version of March Madness is starting tonight at Riverview Park in Lionsville. When you leave here, if you want to get some traffic, drive that way as spring sports is officially underway. We'll play tonight, tomorrow, and Thursday before taking the long 2-week break. North Augusta Optimist Club Easter egg hunt is this Saturday at Lionsville from 10 to 12. I would advise you to be there by 9:30 to get in line. There will be a lot of folks if the weather's good there. And this weekend at Riverview Park, we will host the Icebreaker Travel Basketball Tournament, 150 plus basketball teams on an Easter weekend in North Augusta. And later on, I'll talk to you about the kayak launcher.
Thank you, Rick. Questions? Thank you.
Okay, next, Carl for tourism.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We've been working with the Augusta National in preparation for the women's amateur golf tournament that's coming in. Ladies will be here starting next weekend and be departing on Saturday, April 6th. couple activities. In your packet, you'll find some activities we have planned to welcome those ladies. Beautification Foundation meets tomorrow night, March 26th at 7 p.m. Community Center. And we're working towards a big day they have planned with City Serve Day and Spring Fest on April 27th.
Great, thank you, Carl.
Engineering and Public Works, Tom Zeser.
Streets and Drains crews will be working together with Augusta Traffic later this week, installing the Masters traffic signs through North Augusta. We do this every year, nothing new, but it's an attempt to try to route some of that traffic through North Augusta to avoid some of the exits in Georgia. Those signs will extend from the interstate down West Martintown Road to Georgia Avenue and down Georgia Avenue to the river. Also, we've been notified that contractors are expecting to begin within the next 2 weeks construction of the Martintown Ridge subdivision. This is a new subdivision on West Martintown Road, past Gregory Lake Road, all the way at the extreme edge of the city limits. This is an 89-unit subdivision. So when you see that clearing activity or you get questions about it, that's what that's about.
Tom, what are there's some signs going around town that are covered currently. I know there's like East and Woodlawn. There's one on Georgia Avenue. There's one on Martintown. Do you know what that is? That the Georgia Avenue resurfacing project or?
Well, yes, it's related to DOT resurfacing
Okay.
of a variety of streets in North Augusta. Those signs are, primarily Georgia Avenue and East Martintown Road will be resurfaced from Butler Avenue all the way to its extents at US 1.
Okay. That's neighbors asking.
Yeah, they're just.
I was like, I haven't pulled up the plastic wrap on the signage
They're
yet.
just construction zone notice signs.
Okay. Thank you.
And last but not least, Human Resources, Kayla Ferguson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have, of course, our employment opportunities on the back of your department details, and then we will be tagging along with public safety on Thursday to a job fair. Thank you.
That concludes our department details, so I'm going to move right into the agenda review. And if I may, no old business to cover, it's all new business. And I'm going to skip past items 6, 7, and 8, which are all Riverside Village related, and we'll come back to those. And so I'll start with item number 9 under Planning and Development, ordinance number 2024-09 to amend the zoning map of the city of North Augusta, South Carolina by rezoning plus or minus 128.79 acres of land owned by James M. Ford, Aiken County Tax Parcel Number 211701-001 from R10 Medium Lot Single Family Residential to R7 Small Lot Single Family Residential, first reading. As per the request of the developer, they would like to have this pushed into May for council consideration. So this will not be on the agenda for next Monday. So this will not be considered until May 6th. So this will be brought up.
Withdrawn it, okay.
Yep. Well, I haven't withdrawn it. They've postponed it.
Postponed it, okay.
So this will be heard by the council on the May 6th agenda is what we currently have this penciled in for. So this will be a study session item for inclusion on the last one in April. So it'll be for your consideration on May 6th. So this one's coming off. The next one, item number 10, Planning and Development, resolution number 2024-07, accepting a deed of dedication for the sanitary sewer and fire suppression system, associated easements and rights of way, along with a maintenance guarantee and letter of credit for Village Square Townhomes. Again, this is a standard planning and development item. The development is largely complete, and they need to accept the dedication. I don't know if Tom has anything you want to add on that one, or if Tom does.
Where's the location? I'm drawing a blank. I can't figure out where this is.
This is over by the Holiday Inn Express, I believe.
Right behind the Holiday Inn
Oh, yeah.
Express.
Perfect. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
All right, if you have any questions on that one, the last one we'll have, which is, I'll have Rick come around back up here in a minute, under Parks and Recreation Resolution number 2024-13, accepting donation of an adaptive kayak launcher addition to Beck Park dock from the Georgia Rehabilitation Institute. So Rick is going to take a couple minutes and just kind of educate the council and our citizens on what's being proposed, and so that you would take a formal action on accepting this donation there in Beck Park and Hammond's Ferry. So Rick, I turn it to you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Our friends at Georgia Rehabilitation Institute, one of our major donors of the North Augusta Miracle League field and a huge supporter of adaptive sports facilities and adaptive athletes, has made an offer to purchase an adaptive kayak launcher that would be located on the dock at Beck Park. The choice of location is kind of referred to by South Carolina DNR, is they prefer to have anything that's non-motorized in an area, because we first looked at the new dock at SRP Park and DNR said no, don't mix kayaks with motorboats and so forth. So we chose the Beck Park dock. This adaptive kayak launcher would be manufactured and installed by the Boat Float Company out of Bluffton, South Carolina. The cost of the project is a tick over $40,000. And if you look up at the picture, this is one right here in Hilton Head that they did. And you can see how the adaptive kayak launcher attaches to an existing dock. Next picture, please. The next picture is one that the Boat Float Company did over in Columbia County, Georgia. Now they did this entire project there. Next picture. And this is a rendering of what the kayak launcher would look like at Beck Park. It would be located on the left side, the downstream of the dock. Next picture. Yes. Yes, so what you have is a step down. It's kind of hard to see in there, but you have a step down that allows the handicapped athlete to be able to get inside the kayak and then launch safely out into the river. Yes. And of course, it can be used by anybody as well.
That was my question. It can be used by any type of kayak?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it didn't. Yeah. The last picture that I had for you that you have, it's not going to show on the screen, too. If you adopt this resolution, Tom Zeeser met with me down there with Dennis Skelly from Georgia Rehab and the dock maker, and we kind of looked at this. And if you notice on Front Street, the parking spaces are on the home side of the road. And what Tom suggested, which is a great idea, is that we put some handicap parking spaces on the river side and make it easier for these folks to access this. And we can do this in-house with streets and drains, and our only cost would be materials, which would be in the range of $5,000 to $6,000. And that's something else that obviously we should consider going along with this project.
But from there, they still got to get the kayak down to the launch.
Correct.
So on the drawing, it's parking spaces and then probably new sidewalk path?
That is correct. Mm-hmm. You've got two different pictures, one with a straight shot, and then you've got one kind of over there in the curve. So we've got two different options that we're looking at. And, we'll get together and decide. I personally like the one kind of in the curve, because if you take that straight shot, which made sense, but it kind of cuts into the green space of Beck Park, and I don't really want to do that.
So the handicap is showing here as the gray?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how many spaces will that give you?
I'm not looking at the picture, but I think it was 2. Yes, okay. 2.
And then you have like a Y. What is that? Just a white Y. That's just not in. I mean, it's not going to be a path there. That's just.
Yeah, there would be a path.
There's no. Okay.
Yeah.
Provide sidewalk.
Sidewalk would be added. There we go.
Okay, that's a sidewalk. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I
was sitting there going, "What's he talking about with the Y?"
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
it does look like a Y. Wishbone.
Wishbone.
Yeah.
Okay, so they park and then there'll be a sidewalk that'll go that way to that sidewalk.
Again, like I said, we have the option of doing a straight shot over on your left. You can take either or of those, or for that matter, you could even add both if you wanted to.
Well, the problem, the good one about the right is you got that tree there and it's not taking as much space.
Right.
One on the left, that is going to be, I like what you did.
Yeah.
I like the one on the right.
I had a question.
Yes.
The launcher. Does that mean we'd have additional platform or just the launcher?
You have an additional platform.
I guess that would just kind of attach downstream.
Correct. On the downstream side of the dock.
Approximately how big do you think that platform would be?
How long?
Yeah, how much bigger do you think it'd be?
I think it's about 20 foot by 10. And it'll match up so that it's matches up with the existing dock and not sticking out.
The launcher part would be on the shore side.
Correct.
Okay, great. Sounds great.
And what's the time frame, Rick? If we approve this next week, what are we looking at?
If we approve this, they're looking probably 6 weeks to manufacture and another couple of weeks to get it installed.
Same thing, Tom, as far as with the path and parking, no issue with that.
I'll look to Tom on that as far as time frame for installation if we go with the parking. Okay.
The whole thing, okay. Thanks.
Well, I'd just like to say
That's awesome. Thank you, Rick.
the Miracle League Field is opening doors for the city of North Augusta.
Yep.
I mean, so what a blessing that we're able to serve every citizen in this community. And
This is an example.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What a blessing.
Yes.
I mean, this is so exciting.
Yes, it is. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Rick. Great job.
Well, thanks, Rick. I think we're going to go ahead and move back to the earlier part of the agenda item under new business. So we're going to be talking about ordinance numbers 2024-06, 07, and 08 to talk about the Riverside Village updates. The first two items, ordinance number 2024-06 and 2024-07, were both considered by the Planning Commission at our most recent meeting. And Tommy can talk a little more in depth about kind of the feedback that we got from the Planning Commission. But those were first heard by the Planning Commission and were recommended for approval to the City Council, not unanimously on the first item, but unanimously on the second. And then the third item here is ordinance number 2024-08, authorizing, approving the execution and delivery of a fourth amendment to the Master Development Agreement and a development inducement agreement and others matters related thereto. And so ultimately, that's an item that was not heard by the Planning Commission. This is more from an economic development perspective, along with the Master Development Agreement. And if I can refresh your memory, Council passed a extension for the MDA, which was for 60 days to allow staff and attorneys and developers to have some additional time to come up with an MDA. And that MDA is what is triggering the public hearing next week on the 1st of April. That's the reason why we're having that, is because it's a substantial change to the MDA as originally passed back, I believe, in 2017. So going back to the first item, which is an ordinance 2024-06, and again, all three of these are ordinances. All will require 2 readings, and these are slated right now for council action on the 1st of April and the 15th of April if the first reading is approved for all 3. And these are all linked. So these are all meant to go together. And so your opinions on these matter as far as how these are related, because these are all consistent with the outcome that we're trying to achieve here with the city and with the developer. So going back to 2024-06, to revise the general development plan. Again, if you recall, the original development plan called for senior living apartments on parcel K, which is the parcel that's closest to the Crown Plaza and the city-owned parking deck. It contemplated a commercial office space building on parcel C, which is the parcel that's in between the Green Jackets parking deck and then the stadium, and contemplated townhomes in a number of places to include parcels D, parcels I, some on G and H, along with retail there on parcel G. And so what this new updated general development plan contemplates or says is some changes to the original development plan that includes apartments on parcel K, whereas originally those were senior living at a certain amount. They are now basically standard regular apartments, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments according to the developer, and that is there on parcel K. Parcel C, which was again supposed to be a Class A office space building, that market has not rebounded well since COVID, and so that is now contemplated to be a retail space on the ground floor with apartments above. G will remain a retail space that will overlook the amphitheater, and then the layout of G and then H will be contemplated to be one large complex, if you will, of retail and apartments together, which affects the parking that's down there. So I'll turn it over to Tommy here in a minute, but I would just tell you I was in the room during the planning commission, and we had a lot of citizen feedback, and we also got some feedback from the planning commission on this particular item. This passed on a 4-2 vote. We had one planning commission member had to recuse herself based on residency in Hammond's Ferry. And so the large concerns that at least that I took away from this particular item was the parking density was of concern, traffic was of concern, along with the fact that apartments were not owner occupied, and that was certainly a want of a number of the citizens that were there today. So, I think many of you got to watch on YouTube and see what the perspective was of some of the folks that were in the room, and I know a number of those folks are going to be planning on coming back during the public hearing aspect. So I don't suppose to speak for all of them, just giving you the feedback that in the macro sense of what we heard there. Yes, Councilman.
And I'm sure maybe everybody got the email from Miss Amy Schonenbaum. She's in.
Everybody's gotten it.
Well, my question is, I do not want to ignore her. So who would take what she is asking?
I have responded to her.
Yeah, and I did
that
too.
We will
Yeah.
be, so that is exactly what the public hearing will be on April the 1st.
Okay, so she just tell her to come to that and voice these, because I mean, she did have some good ideas here.
I guess 3 of us might have told her that.
Huh?
I told her the same thing to come to.
Yeah, well, I talked to her too, but I just do not want something push, we want it out there, so what she wanted. I just wanted to be sure the right person heard her voice.
We'll hear.
Thank you.
Yep.
Tommy, is there anything you'd like to add on the general development plan as far as, the feedback we got from the planning commission and what is proposed here in the update to the general development plan?
I think you've pretty well covered it. There was some discussion about parcel K, is where most of the conversation revolved around. And that is already slated to be a 4-story building, not to exceed 60 feet. So that is really not a change when they talked about the building mass. I would tell you across the street in the residential district, across Lafayette is residential, but it is also in an urban district and with a maximum height of 50 feet. So just a couple of data points for you.
I think it's also important to highlight the fact that there are more housing units in this general development plan as opposed to the original concept. So part of that has to do with the fact that they have higher density at parcel K based on the current construct that there is, and also the fact that they're adding apartments to parcel C, which was not envisioned in the original development plan, and so that's an area where there's additional housing units to be considered. And I would also say that I think I share a lot of our citizens' desires that owner occupied is typically what is desired, at least within a city and certainly through the city council, but you also have to have a mix of housing. We have not had any other developers come to the table since I've been in this job that have proposed owner occupied items to include townhomes. We talked about condos with this developer. We also talked about potentially putting street level parking on parcel K. So if you go down to Florida or some other places that are down in coastal flood zones, you'll see where they'll have the apartments will actually start on the second floor and they'll have ground floor parking. That was a discussion that we had with that developer early on. They couldn't make that work within the the construction plans that they had. So just wanted to let you and some of our citizens know that those are discussion points that occurred, and also the South City is a apartment developer. They're not a condo developer. They're not a townhome developer. This is the business that they're in, which is you're building apartments. And also for you and the citizens at home, we've done a fair amount of reference checks on this particular firm with some of our contemporaries in Georgia. So specifically within Kennesaw, Georgia, and Alpharetta, those are some of the projects that the developer Brooks Young mentioned in the Planning Commission meeting. And I've had dialogue with the city managers of both of those towns, along with some of their economic development folks, and explain kind of the situation we were in, about what we were seeking to achieve. And, one, did South City, build what they say they were going to build? And the answer from both those cities was yes. And then, based on the outcome that you were trying to achieve from an urban density perspective in a city center, both in Kennesaw and Alpharetta, is that a project that you're proud of here years later after that project is complete? And the answer on both accounts was yes. So we've gotten good feedback from those folks. I know Lucas is going to talk a little bit about the economic development inducements on the third item here. And when we started talking about those economic development grants, the feedback I got from those cities was that was in line with some of the things that they had to do to move their city centers forward through economic development. So I'll take a pause, at least here on the first item, which is really the general development plan. And I think you've all seen the maps that show what items are going into which parcels. And again, that was up for Planning Commission review. Again, it wasn't a unanimous recommendation. It was a 4-2 recommendation. And I wouldn't say it was fully enthusiastic, but it certainly understands what the intent is that they're trying to meet going forward as far as the housing and the retail component. And I'll pause for any questions on this item.
I guess Tommy or Jim or whoever, it would make sense. I did watch the Planning Commission meeting, and I would say that in general, I think it's probably safe to say, because we've had conversations, that we share some of the concerns with the parking, and certainly recognize the need, because we're not actively enforcing a lot of the parking requirements that are in there now, to step that up and to mitigate that as part of the build out, which is something we knew we were going to have to do regardless of what was being built. So, obviously I agree with sort of the sentiment of some of those concerns, but I also think we're smart enough to know that we need a plan and we need to step up enforcement, which will solve some of that. But as Jim mentioned, a fair amount of the concern was around Parcel K. And there's so much documentation out there. I want to make sure that I'm thinking of it correctly. So one, Parcel K was originally, as we all know, supposed to be senior housing. But there was never, to my knowledge, that was a general definition. I mean, it could have been independent living senior housing, which would have been akin to just apartments for older folks. Or it could have been some sort of assisted living facility, which would have ideally had less traffic, but it's not an ideal space for that, just based on where it's located and the access. But so with the concern around Parcel K, I think there was only a marginal number of additional units in this new proposal for Parcel K. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was less than 5, I thought. So we were going to have that issue related to Parcel K potentially, regardless of whether it was market rate, general purpose apartments, or age restricted apartments. I think that's what it was originally called. Am I right in that assumption?
Yes, sir. When you look at assisted living, I don't think that either our public safety department, our building inspectors, or the state licensing authorities is going to let you have somebody above the floor of discharge.
Right.
So the only thing it could be, in my mind, would be age-restricted apartments, which would be independent living.
Yeah. Which would likely have the vehicles and everything else that a general use apartment complex.
Yes, and that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was.
Right.
I'm a senior now, but it was people like me who are seniors, but we come and go as we want.
Sure.
Because assisted living is, I don't know if you've been in one.
Yeah, I have.
They have a nursing staff.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't far assisted. It was people who were aged but could still maintain their own self.
Councilman, if I could, I'd like to address kind of your 2 points so far. One is going backwards order is the assisted living or the senior level apartments. I feel a lot of economic development calls just in the job that I hold. And one of those calls was from a senior living group out of Florida, and they wanted to put something in North Augusta. And we talked. The very first thing that I trotted out was Parcel K, and said, "Hey, I've got a parcel for you, and I can get you linked up with the developer, and we can get this all moving." And that didn't work for the model. They didn't even get into a financial discussion. They went into the acreage requirements, and for what they need a 4 to 5 acre footprint to be able to have
Single story.
Yep, just to be able to accommodate the folks that are in those kinds of housing circumstances. So that Parcel K was not going to work for like a full-on assisted living or nursing home scenario, and that it would have to be more apartments in that way. And then to your point about the parking enforcement, from a staff perspective, I think everybody sees the problem. The staff sees it, the council sees it, obviously the residents in Perry see it, as do the business owners there in the village. And I would tell you that it's more than just doing parking enforcement of the existing rules. If the council decides to act on the series of ordinances that's before you, we have some time, but it is going to require us to take a holistic look at the village along with Hammond's Ferry and see what changes are going to be required based on these upgrades, if you will, through the general development plan to make it workable. And that could look like, I don't want to commit you to anything at this point in time, but we've had some discussions about, do we have towing enforcement in the village? Do we do booting in the village? Can we add more trolley runs on stadium nights to get more of the parking out of the village and up the hill into other parts of downtown or into city-owned spaces so that we're not clogging all of the lots? I mean, there's a number of things that I think have to be considered holistically within the village. But I think the key for us at the staff level is knowing what the direction is going to be. And so if the council is so inclined to pass these ordinances, then we know this is what we're going to have to deal with, and we can do planning against that's mission set, if you will. But if it's not going to move forward, then that's a different set of rules we're going to have to look at.
So just one more point, then I'm done. The other, and it looks like a fair amount of the additional, a significant amount of the additional apartment complexes is going to be, and I get my parcels mixed up when you move out of K, but what was going to be the general office space?
That's Parcel C.
Parcel C, thank you. Which is being converted from what would have been, I'm assuming, Class A office space to apartments. And just speaking in general, as you said, the market for Class A office space is non-existent at this point. So, moving forward with that as part of the plan, I feel like would have been irresponsible to begin with. And I don't know that we would ever find a developer that could have, one, gotten financing for that type of project, and two, would have had any appetite to build it. So, really to constructively use that property, as much as I think we all would like for some of it to be more owner occupied, I think adding it as apartment space just makes sense for where it is and what it is. And that's all I've got.
Well, I'm on, because Dave and I are around and all that. First of all, I'm going to say the lawsuit that was thrown upon North Augusta for 18, 20 months, that slowed that project down. I mean, we had people wanting to come, but who's going to come to a city when you don't know the outcome? And then number two, COVID slowed us down. And of course, as Kevin said, office space nowadays is almost obsolete. People work home, and I mean, those are things that's just moving on out of the way. So, like I said, I want this project to go and prosper and do. And I think we're on the right trail. And like you said, we're going to have to face these parking problems. And I'm not down there living, but I think we can handle it. We've handled everything else in North Augusta, and we can handle it. But like I said, those two things, COVID and that lawsuit, that place would have been built out. I'm telling you, been built out. That just put a big halt on everything.
Question,
So-
Tommy, I have, I think for citizens, piggybacking off Kevin, we really aren't changing anything in Parcel K. And there was a lot of conversation at Planning Commission, which kind of surprised me. If I'm not mistaken, 70% of Parcel K are going to be single apartments. Okay. So the reality is most of those people, yeah, you may have some couples, but most are going to be people like my kids who are single, who are going to have one car. And the other thing I thought was very important for our citizens, because everybody talked about parking in the street. If I'm not mistaken, either on the site property as well as a hotel deck, all are going to be in Parcel K. So it's not as if there's going to be 100 people trying to find parking spaces on the road. So again, Parcel K kind of surprised me. That was not one that I thought people would be asking a lot about, because it's the same use. Instead of active retirees with 2 cars, we can probably have mostly singles with 1 car, and then they have their parking. So Parcel K doesn't really bother.
And I'll add on to the parking. I think I understand the citizens' concerns. I mean, I would put the fault on us that we have not proven the parking down there. And so when you see extra development coming in, you automatically assume that, it's not going well down there right now. How do we trust that it'll go well in the future? But I think that's where the council has committed to, and will hopefully give guidance to staff to get to that level of parking needs and the parking requirements down there. And so I kind of can see where their concerns coming from, but there is a good plan in place, and that I think that will match up to K.
That's a good point. I agree.
Just a couple of comments. I received a couple of calls or emails over there. So I got the same email y'all did, but I actually received some calls. Most of the people were in Hammond's Ferry, and I spoke to Jim briefly about it. But I think there are some residents of Hammond's Ferry, especially some of the older ones, that are looking at. And again, I don't know the difference between senior living and apartments, but I think there's a couple of them looking at, hey, we're ready to downsize. Maybe there is a market for it. I don't know. When I think of independent living, you think of Brandon Wild, and then there's that one place in Aiken. But this would be the only building if it were to stay as senior or whatever. But I don't think there's any difference in the way the building would be designed, whether it was for senior living, with the exception of maybe an elevator. Again, I don't know if that's a design thing, but that was just a comment that was brought up. So there are some people possibly looking at, that's something you don't think about when you're, my age. I can still cut the grass, do this and do that. You get a little bit older, maybe that's something you can't do. The major thing I got was, it's already been hammered on, that was parking. I've had a discussion with Britton and Jim about that, and we know that's coming. And yes, we've got to work sooner rather than later. If this is passed, I would say start the next day. We've got to figure out something on that, involving not just the people coming to ball games, but the business owners, game nights, things of that nature. The only other thing that one of my customers brought up, and I don't know if there's any data out there showing this, Jim or Tommy, maybe it's something y'all can look into before our April 1st meeting. A lot of people, when they hear apartments, just like many of us here, they think, oh, eventually it's going to run downhill. And traditionally, that's been the case. I mean, you look at a lot of the apartments in North Augusta, they have run downhill. Now, there are some that have stayed nice. And I've pointed to like Crossroads Market, Plaza Place to an extent, because it is around other things. It didn't seem to go downhill as quick as, say, I'm not going to name any of them. We all know where they're at. But is there any data out there to show when you have a mixed use development, maybe and that's a concern too. If you're living in Hammond's Ferry, hey, they're going to build all these apartments, and then if they go downhill, then our housing values go down. I think that's a valid concern. But I don't know. We don't have any place like that here in North Augusta, with the exception of Ironwood and what has been Hammond's Ferry. So that would be the only thing, if we could look and see if there's any data out there or anything that shows something like that. Tommy, I don't know if that's possible to find, especially in urban areas, but I can understand that concern, that if something were to happen, another management company takes over, down the road. So, I mean, I do think that is a valid concern, and maybe it's something we should look into.
I'm going to say one more thing too. I'm telling y'all, when this project started years ago, the biggest concern was parking. This is not a new problem. This is not. Before SRP Park was built, everything, that was, say, David, the thing. And I remember the Jack Lantern Jubilee when we had the first one that was a 2-day. One of the things were how fast we get. It was 10,000 people down here that night. And it wasn't 15 to 20 minutes. Boop, they were gone. So this is not a new concern. It's going to be worked out. And people, now I do say those silly parking meters, if I had my way, I'd go down there and yank every one of them out. Because that is when the problem started, when the parking meters went in. Because you can't get them to work. You're scared you're going to get a ticket. And you hate to leave your car there. It might be towed. And so I say get rid of those parks. I think if you just let people park, charge for your deck and stuff like we do. But also get rid of those parking meters. And like I said, this is not a new, and Eric, you was talking about apartments going downhill. Has anybody gone down there the last 6 years and see what Ironwood, is it that going downhill? No, it has not. It's beautiful, just like it was. You just have areas that's going to be that way, and you're going to have the areas that don't care. And if somebody solves that problem in the world, let me know. Okay.
Councilman, what I would say is that, based on the feedback that we've had from kind of our, I hate to call them sister cities, but, the places that South City's done these units, in Alpharetta, and I've been to Alpharetta and Senior City Center. I've not been to Kennesaw, but I did talk to the leadership out there. And overall, they're very satisfied, with the overall concept that's occurred, this mixed use concept, and it got them the density they were looking at to have in their downtown corridors, and to view this as an extension of our downtown corridor. So ultimately, I can't promise you 20 years from now what that's going to look like, but in the near term, when we're looking at a 10-year window with these projects, they seem to be holding well, and they're accomplishing the goals that are set forth by the city leadership, the elected officials, that they wanted to accomplish.
So I think we've all talked about it some, but just for the people out there a little bit, K originally was apartments, and it had about how many units were in the original plan? 168. So now we're looking at a proposal of 170. So we're not talking a big change, and that goes back to the parking and everything and congestion. So it was all designed and planned that way. So we're not really making a big change there. The only thing is just a designation of whether it's adult apartments or not. And if I'm correct, there's a large percentage of those are just going to be like 1 bedrooms. So that in itself is going to attract a certain clientele that may be more pleasant to, appealing to the neighbors. And then also, parcel C, that's only 87 units proposal. So that's not a lot more congestion either.
And I believe it's 84 councilmen. I believe the plan for that is to park in the stadium deck.
Yeah.
Or in some ground parking there, but the stadium deck parking where that goes to the Crown Plaza / city parking deck.
And we currently do have some office space available.
We have 14,000 square foot of office space that's being marketed currently in the clubhouse building that has not yet been filled.
So that's available as well, and it's been there for how many years now? So the market tells us what we need and what we rely on and what is desired. So I think we're going to be going in the positive direction.
I'll add one more comment on the parcel C with having the retail on the bottom floor. There is a benefit to having the apartments above because that helps the developer fund that project and get it completed before you wait for a retailer to come in. So being able to do that will allow for that retail space to go ahead and go in. And obviously, we do not want it to sit there, but a lot of times as a retailer, you want to see your space before you're waiting for your space. So I think that's one key point to note is that sometimes funding those apartments or any sort of mixed use development where that retail is on the bottom, that helps that situation move forward.
And they're looking for some type of grocery, that's designed to.
And Jim, thank you for answering that with the South City. And I guess mixed use, especially in a small town like this, is a fairly new concept. It used to be 30 years ago, you either lived in apartments or you lived in houses. Now, I don't know. So, I see there's probably some concern there, but I do feel like if you do have the single family, home ownership, owner occupied with those, it really helps. And so, that's the one thing I did tell, this particular customer, but that was a concern of theirs, and I can kind of see that. But, this is still a fairly new concept, but I think it'll really help, especially because somebody was just saying, like Britton was saying, I mean, my daughter, she don't want a house. She's in her early 20s. She's perfectly fine living in an apartment, and I think that's going to be the trend of the future. And, well, especially with interest rates and the cost of building so high, some of these kids may never be able to afford a home. So, I guess the term, apartments maybe need to be relooked at that. You may have a bunch of young professionals, and that's all they can afford. So, it should still keep the value of everything up.
And I'll tell y'all, and
yeah.
Kelly, you remember, 65 years ago, we lived above an apartment in the grocery store below us, right there where Prompt Care is, University Hospital. And so that's been 60, it was Howard's Groceries.
Right. Comes around, goes around.
Comes around, goes around.
And that's the key. It's not a new concept. It's an old concept that's sort of coming back again. And, I said I was done. The last point being, Eric makes a very good point. I mean, when you look at the demographics and you look at what housing trends are right now, you're seeing not just young millennials and younger showing a preference, at least right now. And there are some expense reasons for that as well. But there are other reasons for rental units, for apartments. But you're also seeing the older demographics. So you've kind of got those barbells. You've got the baby boomers and you've got the younger millennials and younger that are actually showing a preference towards rental property. So, I mean, it looks like at least right now that market's changing. And who knows what the how that'll sustain itself over time. But, I mean, that's what the market seems to be demanding right now.
And also, if I may, just from a construction timeline perspective, if the council approves these items, through the readings in April, what the developer said in an open session in the planning commission was that they were intending to, get started by the end of this year, but in reality, they really wanted to get going towards the end of the summer. So they'll still have to go through some of the planning aspects to move the ball, but they're postured to do that, and the city should be done with our construction projects, by the middle of the summer down in the amphitheater and the boat dock, and so that phases well. We'll have our construction activity done, and then that would make way for other construction activities to occur, and that should not, based on the latest and greatest from Georgia DOT, affect what's going on with the 13th Street Bridge and that project, because we don't want to have projects overlaid on top of each other to cause more traffic headaches. But these look like these would be phased, not by design, but just by happenstance in a good way, that those would not be on top of each other. Well, that's all I had for ordinance number 2024-06, but I open to any other questions on this item. And again, we're going to talk all these three items are interrelated. So if there's a question you didn't cover on this one, you want to come back to it, we'll certainly do that. So let's move to ordinance number 2024-07, abandoning a road right-of-way shown as wanting a run on a plat for Hammond's Ferry Ballpark Village, Phase B, in the city of North Augusta. So in very simple terms, what this is that we would give up the city rights to that road. It's an L-shaped road that runs between parcels G and H in order to make their on-street parking work for the apartments and some of the retail at that point in time. That portion of road would need to be deeded over to the developer to be able to accomplish what they need to accomplish. This was heard by the Planning Commission, and this was a unanimous recommendation as a 6-0 vote. We've not used this road for any purpose, and really was built and designed for the original development plan in the way that parcels G and H were laid out. With this new general development plan would require their usage for this not in a public way, but in a private way. One of the discussions we had with the developer as well is that any cost associated with the removal of wanting a run or any updates or changes they do to that stretch is at their expense and not the city. So the city is not incurring a cost to do anything with this road. That's ultimately the developer's cost to bear. Any questions on the road abandonment? All right, we'll just keep pressing. All right, well, I've brought the big guns here with me, Mr. Joe Lucas, to really be able to talk about the economic development aspect of this and the MDA. So as I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this, you've got an ordinance which is pretty detailed. It's a fairly long ordinance, and you've got some additional documentation that are accompanying that ordinance that all go together as a package, and that's really the updated master development agreement. And again, this is a fairly significant change from the MDA that, at least in the time that I've been in this job, the city council has approved 1-year extensions of the original 5-year MDA. So they've done 2 extensions, and then they did a 60-day extension. And this updated MDA is a significant change from the original MDA, which is what necessitates a public hearing on the 1st of April to go forward. And then there are some economic grant requirements that would go along with this as well. But I'll turn this over to Joe. And
Jim, since Joe, why don't you tell a little bit about Joe so people in the audience know why he's talking?
Joe Lucas is our outside counsel with Pope Flynn. It's a law firm in South Carolina that specializes in these kinds of developments. Pope Flynn is the law firm, has been involved with Riverside Village pretty much since its inception. And Joe Lucas is certainly one of the folks that the city staff and occasional elected officials go to for expertise when it comes to master development agreements. And then they also help us with our financial advisors on how the MIDs are structured. So from a legal perspective, not a financial one, of how the supporting documents are that make Riverside Village work in the public-private partnership that it is. And so Joe, including the bonds. And so Joe is certainly one of the folks that has been, much like Kelly Zier, a continuity man for this project, and also has a deep understanding of the legal documents that initially stood up Riverside Village and then will help continue it along. Yeah, I'll swap seats.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me tonight. So as Jim mentioned, I'm going to talk about the ordinance, the Fourth Amendment, and the Development Inducement Agreement. Just to reiterate what Jim was saying earlier, this is a major, it's called a major modification under the Development Agreement Act, and that requires a public hearing. The 3 prior amendments we did to the Master Development Agreement was a minor modification, didn't require a public hearing. So this is the first time we've done a public hearing on one of these amendments. And it's tied, of course, to the fact that South City Partners has come in. They've asked for these changes we've talked about on C, D, G, H, I, and K. And so I'm going to just touch on the first couple of ordinances real quickly, and then I'll jump into a summary of the main ordinance 2024-08, and then the 2 documents that are attached, the Fourth Amendment and the Development Inducement Agreement. The 3 ordinances you'll consider next Monday for first reading, the General Development Plan Ordinance, the road abandonment, and the amendment, as Jim said, are all tied together, and they're all related. This one, the ordinance 2024-08, does not have to go to Planning Commission, so we're coming to you with that. That ordinance starts out with some findings of fact. In fact, several pages of findings of fact. 1 through 5 of the findings of fact, when you get into it, lays out some history of the project, history of the Master Development Agreement. Items 6 through 14 describe the current status of the development and the plan for moving forward with respect to the 6 vacant parcels, including the introduction of South City Partners as the joint venture partner for Greenstone, the master developer, and modifications to the master plan by amending the Master Development Agreement, and the developer's request in connection with that for financial incentive grants to induce their completion of the development, these last remaining 6 vacant parcels. And perhaps the most important of the findings of fact are items 15 through 19, in particular 15, 16, 17, which lay out the benefits to the city of making these grants and catalyzing the completion of the Riverside Village development. And they also describe the way that the grants are going to be provided, which is through this development inducement agreement. That's section 1 of your ordinance when you get through that. Section 2 is compliance with the Byrd test. So the South Carolina Supreme Court has, in a series of cases, considered economic development incentives of various sorts, grants, bonds, other financing mechanisms. And in a case called Nichols versus South Carolina Research Authority, they reversed the original Byrd case from 1984, but they applied a test in Byrd, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this is built around public purpose. So in order for a city to engage in an economic development plan or financing plan with grants like this, the city needs to make certain findings and fulfill or satisfy certain tests. And the Supreme Court has given pretty broad latitude on the way these work, and they've also given substantial weight to legislative action, so city council's action in this case. But the test is basically 4 prongs. What is the ultimate goal or benefit to the public intended by the project? Number 2, are public or private parties the primary beneficiaries? Is it public or private? Number 3, is the benefit to the public speculative? And number 4, what's the probability that public interest will be served and to what degree? So we have laid that out 1 through 4 in the ordinance in section 2, and it describes in each case how these projects satisfy those tests. So, and we've been through that with staff at some length. Kelly has been working with us on that, and our view is that this falls pretty squarely within the way the Byrd test is intended to work, and that this satisfies a public purpose. One question, number 3, about the speculative nature, the way we have dealt with that is that none of this stuff happens. We'll talk about it in a minute when we talk about the development inducement agreement, but none of this stuff happens unless they deliver the project. They deliver and get a certificate of occupancy, the city signs off on it. Again, we'll talk about it in a little more detail in a minute, but that's the crux of this ordinance. Section 3 of the ordinance is the language approving the development inducement agreement and the 4th Amendment to the Master Development Agreement. Section 4 provides for the method of appropriation for these grants. And in particular, what's important under state law is that the grants are subject to appropriation. These are not, sort of fixed promises to pay like a promissory note would be. This is a promise to appropriate in the future. Failure to appropriate by the city council down the road would cause perhaps some action by the developer, but the city council is not obligated to make it unless they actually budget for it. And so in future years, you'll budget for it. And as Jim and Linda have discussed, the Riverfront Central Corps has been accumulating some money, and ultimately that will be the place you point to take those funds. As a general matter, they're funds of the city that have to be appropriated, sort of normal budgetary process. You're not pledging any sort of outside funds or even restricted funds to do it. You're appropriating in the normal budget process. The remainder of the ordinance is sort of the ordinary course ordinance language. It ratifies prior acts. It references the public hearing that we're going to have on the 1st, and then provides provisions regarding the effectiveness of the ordinance. So that is sort of a quick summary of the ordinance. I'm happy to answer questions. I know this is going to be published, this and the 2 attachments, the 4th Amendment Development Inducement Agreement, will be published later or in the morning. Questions on the ordinance before I go to the 4th Amendment? Okay, so the 4th Amendment to the Master Development Agreement, as we talked about, there were 3 before. They were all extensions, nothing else. Here we're doing some more heavy lifting. There's a set of recitals as you open up the 4th Amendment that describe the history of the Master Development Agreement and the purposes of the 4th Amendment. Then it goes into a series of articles. Article 1 extends the term. So this time we're stepping out and extending the term now by almost 4 years. We're extending it to March 15, 2028, which is 4 years from when we just did this 60-day extension. So we built that 60 days into this. So March 15, 2028 will be the new expiration date of the Master Development Agreement. Article 2 of the Fourth Amendment revises the master plan with respect to parcels C, D, G, H, I, and K, which we call the Phase B parcels. So we'll refer to them as the Phase B parcels going forward. It also amends the definition of the General Development Plan to incorporate the revised General Development Plan Ordinance 2024-06. Article 3 specifically calls out the status of the various projects down the hill in Riverside Village. All projects. It either says they were completed or it says they're not completed yet. And with respect to the ones that are not completed yet, those are the ones we're dealing with. So it provides for those new modifications to C and K, G and H, D and I. Including, some of the changes include the new commencement dates for construction and the completion dates, which are all built into the Fourth Amendment. Article 4 of the Fourth Amendment is sort of technical in nature. It revises and replaces the exhibits to the Master Development Agreement with the new exhibits you'll see that are attached to the Fourth Amendment. Article 5 cross-references the Development Inducement Agreement. It basically incorporates the inducement agreement by reference, and it confirms that the grants are subject to appropriation, as we talked about in just a minute, just a few minutes ago. Article 6 provides the conditions to effectiveness of the Fourth Amendment. So for it to become effective, it takes three things. Number one, all the parties have to sign. Number two, we have to have written proof of payment of all taxes on all 6 Phase B parcels. And number three, we have to have, the City Council has to have enacted Ordinance 2024-06. So those things all have to happen for the Fourth Amendment to go live. Then, for it to continue to remain effective, the Phase B parcel owners, the 6 parcels, have to pay their taxes and their mid payments, if any, on time. Failure to pay them on time gives the city the right to terminate both the Fourth Amendment and the Development Inducement Agreement. The city can walk away if these guys are not current on their taxes and mid payments. So, stepping back, when we get into the grants, we are not changing anything about the way taxes and mids are paid. The mids are going to continue to get paid until this stuff gets built to the point where the tax rolls are high enough to sort of get past the mid threshold, right? So this mid has provided the underpinning financially to allow us to get where we are now, and it'll continue to be there until they build everything out and the stuff hits the tax rolls, the new assessments.
So this is the hammer that we haven't had in the past.
That's correct.
Before, we still had the maintained MDA, but now we're saying, hey.
That's right. Yeah, and it gives you the option. So, in other words, if they're 3 days late on their taxes or their mid or whatever, and you're talking to them, that's great. But at some point, if they fail to do it, your option kicks in. You can terminate if you want. You can whatever you want to do with your hammer.
We've been asked by citizens for that.
So then the balance of the Fourth Amendment includes sort of usual miscellaneous legal provisions and exhibits. Any questions on the Fourth Amendment to the Master Development Agreement? Okay, and please jump in like Jim said, this is all together. So if something comes up later, please jump in. So the Development Inducement Agreement is the second attachment to the ordinance. It's Exhibit B to the ordinance. It's incorporated by reference into the Fourth Amendment. It's got a set of recitals that are longer than the Fourth Amendment. Again, what we wanted to do was this agreement, if somebody picked it up, we'd want them to understand the history of how we got here, what the status of the projects is, and why we're looking at giving incentive grants to these developers. Section 1 of the Development Inducement Agreement is the developer's agreement to construct the Phase B projects on the Phase B parcels, as shown on the new revised General Development Plan and Master Plan, including the agreement to hire all necessary construction and design and engineering professionals and to use proper standards of care and diligence in completing the project. So sort of a typical agreement to construct. Section 2 is the meat of this agreement. It's the grant portion. It provides for two types of grants. First are the grants relating to certain fees. These grants are on a per parcel basis. So again, we got 6 parcels. Each parcel has a grant tied to it. And it equates to the actual amounts that the developers pay for 3 items: land disturbance permits, building permits, and sewer tap fees. Those 3 items, as the funds flow in, the city will essentially receive the money, sort of either set it aside, do with it what they will, but calculate it. So you're going to know exactly what the developer paid, and only that amount will be returned to them, assuming they hit their conditions. So we'll talk about that. Each parcel's grant is conditioned on a certificate of occupancy for all improvements on the particular parcel. So on C, the apartments with retail, everything's got to be finished. And with respect to the retail portion of C and G and H for this purpose, and D, there's a grocery on D, I think, as well. With respect to those items, for them to get paid on that parcel for their grant, they've also got to show us proof of debt, written proof of debt or equity funding of up to $60 per square foot of retail improvements. And the idea there is to provide the base funding of the upfit together with whatever tenant contribution is there to build out the retail space. And you've got some proof of it up front that they've got a tenant allowance, basically, funded. The agreement provides a cap to the amounts granted with respect to each parcel. So the city will never pay more than a certain amount laid out in the development inducement agreement. There's a little table in there that lays that. And then together, those add up to $450,000. The city will not pay more than $450,000 in grants. It's likely to be less than that. We tried to build in some cushion. But it'll only ever be the actual amount with no interest. So however long it takes them to build these out, as long as they hit their conditions and deliver, they'll get that same money back they paid in. Of course, all subject to appropriation by the city. So when the time comes, when they make the request for their grant, the request will be the city budget for it. That'll be built in. So that's the first set of grants with respect to the fees. The second set of grants is related to the development of parcels C, G, H, and K. And it's an amount that is calculated based on, but not related to, the mid payments for 2 years on parcels C and K. So the way we came to the number was them asking for relief on the mid, which we can't give them. They're going to make their mid payments as usual. But they said, all right, we'd like to get some incentive based on some amount we're paying in. And that amount we ended up calculating based on parcels C and K, which is about $500,000 a year for 2 years. So $1 million. So the grants under this second set of grants for parcels C, G, H, and K will never exceed $1 million and will be payable in 3 consecutive annual installments of $333,333.33 each, subject to conditions. The first payment is conditioned. The first payment of $333,000 is conditioned on a certificate of occupancy for all improvements on both parcels C and K, including where retail is involved on C, the proof of debt and equity financing at $60 a foot. And to be eligible for that first payment, they got to deliver all that stuff to you all, the CO and the retail debt funding or improvement funding, no later than December 31, 2027. If they fail to meet that deadline, the city's obligation to pay goes away, any of the grant payments. That's a hard and fast deadline. That $1 million stays with the city going forward if they don't meet that by December 31, 2027. As Jim said, South City has been very sort of upfront in their intention to get started this summer. They think they can deliver, first, second quarter of 2026. And they've said that actually in open session here as well. But again, being mindful of the way markets work and the way development works and construction works, we've given them to December 31, 2027 to deliver, to be able to get that grant. So if the first grant payment does get paid, then the second and third payments will follow in 2 consecutive annual installments, subject to another condition coming. But only if the first payment gets paid do they get any rights to the second 2 payments. And those second 2 payments will never be paid in the same year and won't be paid in the same year as the first one. So they got to come in 3 consecutive fiscal years of the city. The second payment will follow once the first one gets made, but the third payment will only be due if they deliver the CO and the retail debt and equity funding proof no later than February 15, 2028. So failure to meet the deadline for G&H, February 15, 2028, will terminate the city's obligation. No further payment. And again, all grants are subject to appropriation in the budget. So our anticipation would be that as they get close to delivering the items they're supposed to deliver, they'll make the request to Jim and Linda and to City Council for the budget. And depending on what time of year we are, we'll see if it gets in the budget or it goes into next year's budget. And but again, all subject to City Council approval in the future via the budget. That's Section 2. Again, that's the heart of this development inducement agreement. Section 3 lays out some other duties of the developers in the city, including the developer's obligation to promptly commence and diligently pursue the projects. They have to secure all necessary approvals and permits from governmental authorities. And they have to comply with all technical codes, development codes, building standards relating to construction and occupancy. So all of that, failure to do any of that, could trigger a default, which would again give the city the right to walk away from their obligations. So for the first time in a while, I mean, Kelly and I were here, Pat and David were here a long time ago when we started all this stuff. That original master development agreement, for lots of reasons, was negotiated the way it was, didn't have the teeth, didn't have the levers in it that we needed for various reasons. But this is, I think, a sound strategy here. So Section 4 of the Development Inducement Agreement sets forth the term of the agreement and then the provisions around default and remedies. So the agreement stays in effect until all projects are completed and any grants payable are paid. When I say that, of course, it means that if they didn't hit the conditions, they're not entitled to them, they're not payable. So if, again, the aggregate amount of $1 million and $450,000 is the very most the city will ever pay. But if any of those conditions aren't ever met with respect to certain of the payments, then again, that just reduces the amount the city has to pay. The city has the right to terminate if the developer defaults and can't cure, or if it defaults under the MDA, including under the Fourth Amendment. If the city defaults, which would primarily only be a payment default, the city has the right to cure it, but if it doesn't cure, the developer has a sort of general right to pursue remedies at law. Again, this is not built for the city to have a whole lot of obligations. The only obligation the city has is to budget for the grants if the grants conditions are satisfied. And the balance of the development inducement agreement has some sort of usual legal provisions and exhibits. So that concludes my sort of summary, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Joe, if you don't mind, go to the ordinance, page 3, number 12.
Okay.
And just kind of reiterate to folks, I think it's important. I mean, I can read it, but I'd rather you read it. But just that, so, people have been kind of, that Greenstone is becoming the minority owner here.
That's correct.
Basically, South City Partners buying these properties. Our main deal, and Greenstone is still the master development per se for the document, but as far as dealings, they are a minority owner here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
And that's the important thing that Jim researched and we did, that, whatever has happened in the past, it's a different day. Minority owner is not the same as majority owner.
That's right.
Bond deal. So kind of talk through that if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. South City is under contract to purchase C, G, H, and K, the main parcels down there. As you know, D and I in the new plan have a total of 20 townhomes between them, each with 2-car garages underneath them, and that's single-family townhomes. But the key pieces down here are C, G, H, and K. And South City has a contract to purchase. Our understanding is that if this goes through, again, our schedule is April 1, first reading April 15, second reading. There's a planning commission action 2 days after that on some site plans. But if this goes through, South City intends to close on the properties fairly quickly because they're ready to move. And when they close, my understanding is there'll be a joint venture entity, again, majority controlled by South City. And there's been no doubt in our discussions through the entire process that the South City guys are running the show. I think Greenstone's been very accommodating. They've been, I think, flexible, and they brought these guys to the table. So, but you're right, Mayor. That's an important piece to this, and it's probably one of the linchpins of why the city was willing to move forward.
Joe, any of the, I guess we call them inductory payments, we can keep all the interest on that. Let's just assume they hit their timelines, but the whole time that that's sitting in our bank, we get to keep the interest from
That's
that,
right.
correct?
Yeah, exactly. No interest on any of these grants.
Okay.
And again, so the fee grants, the first set, based on the land disturbance and the building permits and the sewer tap fees, that's easy to calculate, right? They're going to write checks. That money's going to come in. You're going to see it. The mid payments are, again, not specifically tied to this agreement because we're not going to tie up the mid assessments in any way because they show up on a tax bill. So we're not tying those up, but we can calculate what gets paid in as mid payments. And again, all that comes in. City has the right to use any of that and is only going to be required to pay this in the exact amount shown, the 333, 533, never more. Times 3.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
And let's just say, in theory, after we pass through this agreement and South City is with Greenstone at that point, if for some reason South City backed out last minute, this agreement would kind of just fall out of place, correct?
Well,
yes, it would.
So the answer is that we're entering into it, the mayor's point, with the master developer because that's all we got right now, right? So the agreement would stay in place. They'd have to perform, and if they didn't perform, which would be, I guess that's one scenario, that if South City walked away, Greenstone would have to
still meet the
ante
needs,
up, right?
yeah,
and if they couldn't ante up, then all this goes away.
So that's still the hammer. But
That's right.
I think the only thing I would ask, Jim, you may want to just share, I think it's important for people because, again, we renewed this for 60 days contingent upon this MDA 4. But I think let's kind of remind folks, again, if the MDA for whatever reason lapse, just what that looks like. It's not as if, oh, this thing lapsed tomorrow, and by the way, all of a sudden these property falls in our laps and we can start doing something the next day. I mean, maybe just kind of reiterate to citizens so they understand this again.
So if there is, there's a couple of things to kind of collate there. One is, if there's no MDA, if the MDA expires, does that collapse the overall project? It does not, but it does make it harder to do development down there in the village. But to your point about, the city's gone through this drill before in 2020 and 2021 where Greenstone was not able to make all their tax burden or mid burdens at that time. And so those properties then go to the tax sale. And then, in the last time we did this in 2020, some smaller investors bought different parcels. Specifically, I remember parcels H being bought along with parcel B, which was the stadium parking deck. But all the large parcels that we're talking about here, K and C and G, none of those were purchased at tax sale. Those went to the Forfeit Land Commission. And as Kelly Zier can advise you better than I can, the owners of the property still have a full year to redeem those properties. And then and during that redemption period, the city is not legally allowed to negotiate on what to do with those properties. You can't enter into negotiation with another contractor to do that because you put the city at risk in dealing with the original developer. And so then they have to be redeemed by another sale if we do that through the city. So it's my very long-winded way of saying is that if these properties ever went back to a tax sale again, there's a minimum of 3 years worth of mid payments that we would not be realizing, across the development and potentially more. And so the the option for the city, should this not go forward as far as a developer, would be to the detriment as opposed to what is being currently negotiated here. And what I would also tell the council and our citizens as well is we try to be fiscally conservative in all things. And so ultimately, based on the track record we've seen with the timeliness of the mid payments going through at least my tenure here, we built up some reserves in the Riverfront Central Core to deal with the potential lack of funds in a particular year based on mids. So I feel very comfortable that the economic inducements and grants that are being discussed, the city has the ability to make those payments in future years, and that ultimately that will secure our long-term debt service and financing through the out years to be able to have a dedicated revenue stream through those parcels. So I feel it'd be better to have a revenue stream in hand through parcels K and C and G and H that would carry the tax load going forward.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions for Jim or Joe? Anybody? All right. We're good.
Mr. Mayor and staff, or council, I'm sorry, I would also, we have a few items that are here on the tail end. I would say this concludes the staff portion of this. You do have item 4, legal executive session request of the city attorney. I believe Kelly and I had that discussion along with Joe earlier today, that there is no requirement for us to have an executive session in this particular item for item 4, although I would request that we still do item 5. So I turn that to you for consideration.
All right. So just make sure nobody on council is fine with no item 4. So we'll move to item 5, which is legal executive session request city administrator in compliance with section 30-4-70A2. The city administrator requests an executive session for the purpose of discussion and negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements, proposed sale or purchase of property, the receipt of legal advice with the legal advice relates to a pending, threatened, or potential claim or other matters covered by the attorney-client privilege, settlement of legal claims with a position of the public agency and other adversary situations involving the assertion against the agency of a claim. Discussion specifically related to a legal briefing in regards to update on potential litigation matter. Upon return to open session, council will not take action. I do have a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Ms. McCauley, do I have a second? All right, Mr. Presnell, all in favor? And that is unanimous. We will. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Y'all have a wonderful evening.